What's going on, everybody? I'm Danny Thompson, and welcome to Between the Brackets. Between the Brackets is almost like a podcast style kind of show where we bring experts in the field to talk about technical content that is relevant to you. So, today's episode, we actually have three amazing individuals joining us today, and we will be talking about modern Android development features and how you can utilize this best and include this into your current projects. And super excited to be a part of this because we're going to cover a lot of topics. We're definitely going to be taking questions, so we're going to be monitoring the chat, and if you ask relevant questions towards what we're sharing at that moment, highly recommend sharing that, and we can kind of answer what it is that's necessary to you. But I know we're going to cover a lot of topics like Jetpack compose and dependency injections and things like that. So super excited to kind of jump into this conversation. And I'm joined with three individuals. Number one being Mohit Sarveiya, which is a GDE. He's a Google developer expert on Android technologies. I'm also joined by Madona, Syomba, who is a Google developer expert as well on Android technologies, and Jay Whitsitt, who is a GDG organizer. So he hosts events in his local community in Kansas City, but he's also a mobile developer and teaches hands-on lessons when it comes to mobile development as well. So I'm going to bring all three speakers up to the stage to join me. Thank you so much for hanging out, everybody. I'm super excited to be having this session with you today. And maybe before we start, you can give yourself a brief introduction and let people know why you're here today. Mohit, let's start with you.
Thank you for having me. My name is Mohit. I'm an Android engineer. Started doing Android in about 2011, and been doing it since then. And I'll share my experiences and challenges of using modern frameworks and on large code bases and small ones.
That's fantastic. And Madonna, what about you?
Yes, hello everybody. My name is Madona Syomba. I have three names, Madona Syomba. I am an Android engineer, and I started doing Android back in 2014. That's when I got passionate before I was doing Java. And I've loved the industry so far. I love how far we've grown and how everything looks like. And today I'll just be here talking to that amazing Android like Mohit and Jay. And yeah, looking forward to the discussion.
Love that. And Jay, what about you?
Hey everyone, my name's Jay Whitsitt. I've been a mobile developer for probably about a decade, I guess now. Started on iOS, but also do Android now. And I'm also a GDG organizer for GDG Kansas City. So like Danny said, put on events for local community. A little different now since everything's virtual. So if you're interested, you can also check those out on YouTube and some other websites.
So with the introductions and everybody now knowing who you are and what you're bringing to the table, I kind of wanted to jump into a lot of the new features that have been released as of late. And so there's been a lot done in the Android ecosystem, and to add more features for developers to utilize, and some even adding to the developer experience, but also adding new tools to the conversation. And one of those being Jetpack compose, Hilt with dependency injections, etc. What are things that you think developers should really be spending some time looking into if they are not familiar with them as of yet? We could start with Mohit.
I think that developers could look into obviously compose and learning about playing on your own and doing going through the code labs that are really helpful to just understanding the basics of how to think, and it's a different way of thinking where you're building UIs declaratively. I think a good place to start is just like building, for example, something simple as learning how do you build a list of items on display a list, and that really gets you. I mean, as you know, in this in technology, things are coming out really rapidly, and staying on top of it is important. Very important for your career. And so that's something that I think learning compose, and the benefit of doing learning on your own is that as when you go about bringing it into a code base, it really gives you the background and to know where to start. Having some background is important. So compose, and I think the other part is using coroutines and it's a way to do background asynchronous work. It's there you might be using RX Java, which is another way to do background work. So that's something that I know many people are migrating or in the process of migrating towards it, and that's something that I think people very beneficial to learn about, incorporate in your code base. The two things, in my opinion, those are important.
I have a follow-up question, but before I get to that, I want to ask the others. Madonna, same question. Like, with all the new features, what do you think developers should be looking into right now?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And also, thank you, Mohit, for starting us up. And that was awesome. I also want to just highlight key points that Mohit mentioned. The code labs. The code labs are amazing, especially if you're new to Android and you're starting up. Go to the code labs and try to check the Jetpack Compose one and see if you can follow through. I feel like one of the biggest advantages of Compose is that coming up now as a new developer, it's not like us, like the way we used to do things before, like let's say with XML layout. You will have this ability to learn a new way to build your UI, which is awesome. I mean, you'll make great UIs. And I mean, can you imagine that? Because before, what we used to do is just go declare some XML, we had relative layouts, and then we had constraint layouts, which were great. But now it's even greater. But that said, I feel like always also learning about the previous things, it's pretty good. It helps you get the knowledge of like understanding how even Jetpack Compose came to be in. So that's something else that I like just to advise, like on your free time though, just look into that. But otherwise, look into Compose, look into Hilt. Hilt is amazing. I've used it. I did a code lab on it. It's simple to understand, very user friendly. I would say, not like Dagger. I know there's Coin too, but Hilt wins for me. I would definitely give it a 100%. So yeah, those 2 points. Look into Hilt and please try Jetpack Compose. It's going to be amazing because we'll now have great applications. Because also remember, when you're building applications, people want to see great UIs. And before we used to struggle with building the UIs, but now that we have cool stuff and you can actually write them as code, that's awesome. And you can test it pretty easily too, like unit tests. I found that it blows my mind. Yeah.
Love that. And Jay, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think all the main points were kind of hit. Definitely, Jetpack Compose is a big one, and I think it's a good call out that Madonna made to also kind of have that history of what happened before all these new features and stuff are made, because you'll if you Google something, you'll get tons of results. They're not all going to be for the latest. And one good thing about code labs is I feel like Google does a pretty good job of keeping those updated. You can typically find the older ones and the newer ones, so you can kind of compare contrast what's changed, what if I find this post on Stack Overflow that's for XML but my app's for Compose, how do those two things kind of work either together if I have a combined app that has both of those, or if I need to kind of translate from how it was done in the old way to the new way. So having that history, I think, is also really, really important.
Love that. So I do have a follow-up question, and I know we've all mentioned Compose at this point. Is Compose really worth the hype? Like, is it really worth someone taking all this extra effort to learn? I know it's declarative UI and it's kind of like a buzzword in the industry, but is it really, really, really worth all this effort that's going to go into someone learning a brand new tech, like implementing this and trying to get used to it, especially with it being so new? Do you think it's worth that effort? Anybody want to take that question? Mohit, what is your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think that that's a great question. It makes UI development really faster, and you could build something complex from like little amount of code. I think the old way using creating drawables, like doing animations and XML was tedious, and it wasn't easy. You could get it done, but it wasn't easy. And why Compose was introduced. One reason is to be able to build features really with really nice UI really fast, and that's really a huge benefit of Compose. One reason to learn it. You can make a similar argument like when Kotlin came out. People made a similar argument. What do you think, Madonna?
I think what I can say is that, to add on what you've said, Mohit, is that one thing that I feel that it's going to be pretty great for new people that are using Jetpack Compose is that the assets and our apps, what is it called? Our apps, trying to find that word, they're going to be lighter. Because I remember when we used to build with the old way, I'm going to call it the old way now, you find that you might have so many assets, and when you're pushing your app to even though I know there's the bundling thing now, but now imagine us using just pure code, like to write all these UIs. We don't have to add any more assets. Because I remember before we would either get a JPNG and then convert it to an SVG. Now we don't need to do all that. I hope I'm not wrong, but I'm guessing we won't have to do a lot of that, where we will write more stuff by ourselves. I mean, I think it's super cool. So it will, based on the code base, I think we will reduce a lot of code in our code base. We will have, we will have less, because if you can write all the buttons, let's say in one particular line, I mean, how cool is that? Wait, correct me if I'm wrong, because I've not dived into Compose a lot, but I think that should be pretty.
Oh, you're exactly right. It makes it faster to develop UIs.
So we were asked this really interesting question, and it's kind of related to a question that we were going to ask anyway, but I thought we'd bring this up right now from the chat. I'm very new to Android. Any suggestions on where to start? That would be great. What would you suggest as a learning path or tools that someone can use to really learn and start developing in Android? Anybody want to take this? Mohit?
I can take this one.
Oh, Jay, go ahead.
So, I mean, not to shamelessly plug GDGs, but local GDGs, I mean, have a ton of content. Since COVID, I know a lot of them, including my own, have been putting stuff on YouTube. But the place I would probably start first would be Code Labs, or just kind of those the Get Started documentation on the Google Developers website. That has a lot of just kind of, for me, when I'm trying to either develop content or introduce new content to someone, getting that low barrier of entry is kind of important. And I think developer documentation, like the simple developer documentation, because it's not all simple, and entry-level Code Labs, those are the two biggest things that I kind of reference if I'm making my own content. I know some Code Labs, like I said earlier, will be a little outdated. So definitely try to find some more recent ones. If you're, wanting to use Jetpack Compose, you're going to want to use a newer one, because everything older is going to be using layout XML files, that sort of thing. So yeah, definitely check the kind of creation date or last updated date on some of that stuff.
Love that. Anybody else want to share some ideas or tips? Go ahead, Madonna.
Yes, I wanted to add on to that. Great point, Jay. I also wanted to add, if you're new also, I do know that we are using a lot of Kotlin, and I want to add, there's this platform that my manager, she's amazing, she shared with me. It's called Coins, like a playground for getting started with Kotlin, and I found it pretty amazing. If you're familiar with Java, you can use that, where you will go and play around with what they have, and then you can see the answers, but don't look at the answers first. Just look through fast. You can try to translate a code written in Java in Kotlin, and I found that pretty amazing. And also, again, like Jay said, meetups, attend those. Study jams, they're your to-go-to friend. And then Code Labs, amazing. And also other great YouTube videos. For instance, Like you can look through, I know a few people that do live session. Like I know Adam, he's also a GDE, and he does a lot of good videos for people wanting to join the Android space. Yeah.
For sure.
Just to add on to what Madonna and Jay said, really great points of using the code labs and learning from the code labs and documentation. I think learning Android development, it's like a plateau, a hill that you climb, and as you first start off, it's important to, going through the code labs is important, and then on top of that is building your own app, building, like, and you may be using an app that you really like. Can you build a miniature version of that, really something small in that? And it's not going to be easy. I mean, you will struggle, but that's part of learning. It's about, I would recommend not going to compose directly, but learning Android development, like, without using compose first, and then build something without it, and then you could, on top of that, use compose and build the same thing in compose and see the difference and the similarities. You'll realize why it's better. And So, building your own, having your own small projects, it really helps you to get experience and of development, and that's really important.
One thing that I'll even tack on here, and I know we've mentioned code labs a lot and resources. Of all like the languages and tools out there, Android is probably one of the most active at sharing resources from the Android dev team. Like, I feel like they're constantly adding YouTube videos, content related to it, speaking at conferences, sharing documentation. And one website that I'm going to share here in this chat is developer.android.com. You can get all the Android related resources from there, including the code labs, but also there are certain certificates that are kind of given out for different areas, right? Like Google has several, and one of them being the Android certification. And they have an entire path that you can follow towards passing that examination. So that will literally take you from writing your very first hello world all the way to building out applications. Highly recommend that. That's my homepage, letting you know. Like I didn't write Android before this role, and the last 6 months of my life have been dedicated to Android, and that's been my homepage every single morning when I turn on my computer. That is the first website I start with. Highly recommended. I can't emphasize that enough. So we have some questions coming in the chat. We'll get to them in a second, but I do want to get through several other questions that I have. And one being, when it comes to Android development, at least some people always get this idea of it's just simply a mobile application. But I think we all know that there are multiple use cases for Android technologies. And I know it's been used in other areas. And I kind of wanted to like rely on Madonna first for this question. And the question is, what other technologies does Android work really well with?
Yeah, I feel like that's a great question too, Danny. And one of the things that we use at work is the augmented reality. And reality can be a fun technology to play with. And the basic premise of AR is to overlay digital content on top of real things for people that don't know what that is. And this is like something like a map, a camera, or sometimes the sky. And I feel like the AR code, which is the API that we use, uses three key capabilities to integrate virtual content with the real world. And this can be seen through your phone's camera. So what you do is like you have your phone camera, but then you're in like a different world. So the three key capabilities are the motion tracking, environmental understanding, and light estimations. All complex dogs, I know. But I've come to notice that AR Core is pretty cool, and the company that I'm working with right now, we've leveraged this new technology to solve problems. The problems being now we work in a situation where if a customer has a problem, you don't need to go there immediately. We just use the AR Core. They're able to see your place. You're able to get the diagnostic immediately. How cool is that? Yeah. So I think you can use so many things in Android. You can also, something else that I can say, you can also build your own like Pokemon Go. If you're looking for a project to try in AR Co, I think they're great projects on GitHub. that are like just for Pokemon. And you can play around with that and see how you can leverage also the power of ARCO and then get into the world. I feel like it's going to be pretty amazing, especially it being, I think, related to the meta world now. It's also a buzzword these days. So pretty big space that I feel like the future is looking forward to. And I think we will even solve more problems using that. Yes, Pokemon Go.
Love that. Love that. Love that. Does anybody else want to touch on the subject of what other technologies work really well with Android? All right. So one thing that you kind of mentioned also is most people, when they think of Android development, they're thinking of putting it in the App Store and trying to get as many people as possible to download their applications, which is a great strategy, by the way. But there's another side to mobile development, and kind of leading with Madonna here again. I know one thing that you've been heavily involved with is business facing applications where you're making business to business solutions for actual clients and customers as opposed to developing applications for people to download and utilize. How does this really work, and what is kind of the thing that you're looking at when you're developing these applications?
That's a great question too. And what I can say is that mostly when you're building for consumers that are not like people that are very tech savvy, for instance, in a good way, this is where, for instance, you're building for other developers. There's so many things you have to consider. For instance, how is your architecture? How are you making sure that the classes you want them to see are being hidden in the right way? How sure are you're not exposing, like, let's say, sensitive PPI, like sensitive data? So there's a lot that goes into the planning of that is, for instance, SDKs. And I feel like I've seen jobs that actually say specifically SDK engineer. So I feel like if this is something that you want to do in the future, look into it. It's pretty cool where you build for other developers as compared to building for real-time customers where you'll get the feedback. In this case, when you get your feedback, is more of, hey, the code is not working. Not like, hey, your app is not working. So yeah, it's pretty different.
So what would be like some nuances or like maybe even challenges that you face developing for developers or more technical savvy individuals than the mass public?
Oh yeah. So one thing that I've learned is that if you make a big change in your API, it might be pretty hard for the other developers to integrate. And that might be tough because it might be consuming for them to understand how to use the new changes that you've made. So you have to be very considerate when you're making break change in API changes. I mean, I hope that made sense. Like if I'm going to be using a new API, I need to make sure that it will not be very difficult. And that's why it's always good when we dogfood it ourselves, just to play around with it and see how will this work when other developers try to implement it. Because we are relying on them too, not to be stuck. Because maybe the team that maybe will be sent immediately, it's not developers, but we want to make sure that, hey, is it so easy to integrate, or are we going to give them like a difficult time integrating this? So that has to be in consideration.
Love that. Anybody else want to tackle this question before I move on to the next one?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that dogfooding point. So it's probably 5 years ago or so. A company I worked for, we started developing an SDK that was going to be used by other developers. And it was very humbling to do that, I will say. So we started out with that code internal and then kind of expanded that or abstracted that out to a framework that others could use. And the first time I did that, I was like, oh crap, I need to kind of freshen up on my architecture skills a little bit. So if you're going to do anything like that, definitely dogfood it and use it yourself.
I think you touched on something really interesting right there, and I kind of want to follow up with that. And this question open to the panel. You mentioned app architecture. What is it? Like, can you explain what app architecture is? And I think that's going to lead into my next question that I have teed up. But anybody want to take that? Or maybe Jay? Oh, Mohit? Okay.
So app architecture involves a lot of things. So part of it is, developing when you're developing a feature, like you might be using like that. There are different types of ways to architect UIs, like patterns such as model view presenter or model view model or model view intent. But so that's part of the architecture, but that's not the whole architecture. So when you look at an application, you also involves like how do you set up navigation, and you could use Google's navigation fragment Jetpack library. You could architect it with a single activity and multiple fragments, but you could also go in different ways to architect your navigation. So architecture also involves how do you handle like there's also your analytics, you may have how do you handle metrics, logging, and also DI. What does your dependency injection graph look like for your application? So how do you also handle monitoring and alerting for your application, for your critical system like your API? How do you have that set up? So it's a kind of architecture. When you step back overall, it's a combination of those things. There's a really good book I'll recommend. I'll share the link in the comments that highlights 20, I think it's 23 problems that are common problems that every architecture has in all those different areas that I shared.
All right. Anybody else want to tackle this before I go on to the next question? All right. So now that we've explained what it is that architecture is, hopefully people won't be lost with this next question. But we were asked, with Compose, is MVVM still the recommended architecture for Android development? Anybody want to tackle this? Maybe Mohit?
Yeah. MVVM, you could use MVVM, but and it's interesting. That question's interesting because obviously that there are differing opinions, and it's you don't want to tie your view model to a composable function. So there's a really nice library that Square recently introduced called Molecule that allows you, which is a way of how do you set up, your architecture with Compose. How do you set up being able to read a stream of data, and they provide an abstraction for it. I think, and that's an interesting question as this technology is being introduced. How do you consume it? And yeah, so I think Madonna, you were going to say something. What do you think?
Yeah, I was going to add on that. That's a great point that you mentioned, that it's not, I think it's still debatable. And I've been reading around where they're saying that MVI is the best pattern, but I've not played around as much. I've not played with it a lot as much to myself to say that this is the recommended. But if mentioned, we don't want to tie the view, like you mentioned. So I think this is something that we'll keep learning as we go, and yeah. But so far, I think for the other patterns, for the other way of doing Android, MVVM is the recommended one.
All right. So since we're on the subject of Compose, I know using and integrating Compose is something that's been top of mind for a lot of developers. And what has been your experience with integrating Jetpack Compose? Anybody want to take this?
I could share my experience. So and it's there are challenges, and when you integrating Compose, I think in my opinion you want to take a step back and think about, come up with some form of that document which states, obviously it states the benefits. You as a developer, you may know, it might be like very apparent to you, but not some stakeholder. So, and another, before integrating Compose, like it's really important to come up with a phase transition. Like, you want to start off in the first phase of identifying the simplest thing. And it might be like a debug panel in your app. you want to identify to use compose on something that has the minimal amount of risk that won't cause to the user, because something might go wrong and there might be a bug that you're introducing. So you want to start off with something really simple, and then build on top of that. As you go from one phase to another of integrating compose, you definitely will come up with different patterns, that are really nice that you could share with the community. So, for example, recently there was an article by Chris Baines on called the slot using the slot pattern with compose. So that's an example, of coming up with as you begin to think about using compose, you use those patterns. Most importantly, using, and then when you go about integrating compose, you obviously think about how will you set up your themes, and your your common components, your UIs. So and most importantly, you want to identify the risk and you want to find a way to mitigate them. You don't want to integrate compose in an area of the app that's really complex, because that in itself has a lot of risk, but you want to build up to that. Another last thing that's important is like onboarding. Like if you have a large team, you want to, they in order for them to be successful to learn, they need to learn compose. And setting up lunch and learns, and a lot of people have been doing that in the community. I was talking to another GD, Josie Wolf, who sets up at his company, lunch and learns, and they work together on building some sample application in their team. And that really gives helps you to share knowledge with your team members on learning compose. And onboarding is something really also very important to think about. So those are all the things from my experience, just before integrating and coming up with like a doc on this, thinking about the risk and the migration path, like in different phases, is important.
Do you have any tips that you think that you could give that would make it easier for somebody to start doing this?
Yeah, I'm looking at example proposals. There was one. I'll share a link out to that. That was at a really big large company that someone wrote, which is a really nice example of how to go about thinking about as I'm saying, this document, this brainstorming, this path forward to it. And it's just starting out. I mean, my best advice is start off with really something simple. Like it might be like I think a lot of applications have like a debug panel or some like settings page, and really simple page, and you want to start off with that basically. So that's my suggestion.
Love that. Anybody else want to talk on this before we move on?
I just want to
All
thank
right.
Mohit. Oh, sorry. Just wanted to thank
Go
him
ahead.
for that great answer. That's well said.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So next question I have is, dependency injections have always been part of Android development, and with Hilt being released, how's your experience been with Hilt? And do you recommend this as a tool that people should really be looking into right now?
Yeah, I could share my experience.
Sure.
I worked on code bases that didn't use Hilt and worked on code bases that did. The benefit of Hilt is that now it makes it really easy to set up. One of the biggest pain points of using Dagger was the initial setup, and it wasn't really easy. And if you're new to it, there is a learning curve to it. But once you set it up, the benefits are really really awesome. I mean, you're not writing the boilerplate code to instantiate dependencies. You just annotate it with add inject. And then so using Hilt, before using Hilt, you had to set up creating view models with using factories, and you had to find a way to set it up with Dagger, and it wasn't easy. It was possible, but it wasn't easy. And Hilt really makes it really makes it simpler to be able to inject V models, to be able to set up your application, to be able to inject Android related dependencies. And they have a really nice feature of, they have components such as single component you could install in like your global dependencies into that component. So, integrating, but Hilt is really nice to set up, but there's a challenge when you're working on a large code base, like, it's hard to, in my experience, to do it piecewise. You have to, it's a project in itself. And if you're using, one of the things about Dagger is that the advanced features such as multi-binding are really, it's hard to comprehend. So there's a learning curve to Dagger, but Hilt really makes it simpler to inject Android dependencies. So that's my experience.
Of that. Anybody else want to talk about their experiences with Hilt and dependency injection?
Jay, do you want to go first?
Or Jay?
I actually haven't used Hilt. Our app is not small, so we've just had heartburn every time we think about changing things.
Makes sense. So I think I would say for me, I found it pretty, amazing to use, and also easy to understand when I started learning it. And also to integrate it was not very difficult. And also to add on what Mohit had said, where I hit many amazing points, is the testing is pretty good too. Setting up the test for Hilt is not difficult. And also they have great documentation. And yeah, I like Hilt. Use Hilt.
Absolutely. I can say from my experience, I led an Android study jam with several Googlers, one of which being Manuel Vivo Vicente. And it was a really engaging conversation that we had with Hilt versus Coin. And I learned a lot about Coin that I didn't know about previously. And even from his perspective, one is not necessarily better than the other, but a lot of pain points have been resolved with the creation of Hilt. And from at least what we've been seeing firsthand with other developers, is that not only has the pain point been resolved, it's added to an easier experience. So if you haven't looked into it already, kind of recommend it. And especially when so many high-level individuals keep recommending it, it's something you probably want to pay attention to a little bit. So yeah, definitely appreciate that. And so we kind of come into the next level, right? All of y'all being professionals. And I kind of want to maybe even start with Jay for this question. What skills do you find necessary for someone to land a job as an Android developer? Like, what should they be looking at? What should they be preparing themselves for? What should they kind of know to really make sure that they're in the best possible position to land that first opportunity as a junior?
I would definitely say Kotlin. My company actually just went through some like hiring a new developer, and it was interesting to me that a lot of developers that wanted to do mobile development didn't quite think that Kotlin was. I don't know if they didn't think it was worth their time to learn it yet, or if they thought it was still a little new to use in like production apps. But I definitely think it's something worth investing the time to learn. A lot of apps, and like if you go to Stack Overflow, it's by now most answers will probably have, here's the Java answer, here's the Kotlin answer. To me, that's definitely the signal that it's definitely time to know what that means, and to know how to do something in Kotlin. So that would be the definite first thing I would say. And then honestly, I would say all the things that we've kind of talked about today, getting on that, being knowledgeable in the terminology of these kind of like new services and features will definitely help in that interview. If you're able to know something that the interviewer doesn't, that's definitely gonna give a plus for you. And I mean, nobody knows everything, so definitely hit on Compose. Hilt, like I said, my app doesn't use that. It's something we've looked into. We're still on Dagger and use a lot of features that it's just a lot of time to kind of have to dedicate. And I think, like Mohit said, it's a project and a project. So there's going to be a lot of companies that may be on Dagger but are interested in Hilt. So knowing those differences and being able to compare and contrast, that's going to be really important.
I
You're
think you're
muted, Danny.
muted.
Most common phrase of 2021, and we're almost at the end of the year and still living it. But
it's not a stream if somebody doesn't do it.
That's true. That's true. Anybody else want to tackle the question of what someone needs to do to essentially be more job ready to land the first opportunity? Mohit, maybe?
Yeah, I could add on to that. So, I mean, that's a subject I could give so much, because I've interviewed so many people in the past year, and I'm very passionate about that subject because I know the struggles and I experienced them, and I still do, even I have so much experience. Is that getting an Android job is not just about knowing Android, and that's the important thing you need to understand. It's not just about knowing how to use Compose. That's only a part of it, or knowing what an activity is. The interview process is different at so many different companies, and from small companies to large companies. And having experienced that, so much advice I could give. I think that as if you're an engineer who doesn't have a lot of experience in Android, your interview process will very likely will ask you a lot of algorithm questions, and being able to answer them, being able to, that's something that's going to be part of your, or unfortunately part of your career, and there's leetcode.com, which is the website, and it's not just about getting to the right answer and those questions. It's about understanding how well you could solve problems, how well you could articulate. And it's not hard. It's very hard to, as you start off, to be able to solve those types of problems and articulate your thinking in 45 minutes. But something you have to practice. Understanding your data structures is important. It's not just about Android development. Understanding a queue, a stack, and when to use them. And that's important. And as an engineer, as you grow, it's something that's always going to come back to you, and every time you're looking for a job, even if you have experience. And you're going to be asked a toy question, which has nothing to do with Android, and basically, but it's we're problem solvers, so it's a way to learn how to solve problems, and that's something that's important. I mean, I have interviewed people who have a lot of Android experience, but they can't get the job because they can't solve those problems. I interviewed one person I remember was asked the question, could you print out a Fibonacci sequence? And the person struggled, couldn't get the job, but they had a lot of Android experience. And there's a school of thought. One is that those types of questions are good or bad. But I don't want to get into that debate. But this is a system, and in order to be successful in it, you have to be able to excel at algorithms and data structures. And it's also very important as part of your job every day, knowing when to use a set versus a map. And and it's not easy because some people, you ask a question about recursion, and they won't. Recursion is not used a lot in mobile development. I only had to use it once. But you'll be asked that question a lot as you go out to get a job, and that's something that you have to know, that you should know. I mean, that's my opinion from my experiences, but I could share so many more things on that. So,
yeah, to be honest, completely agree with that regard. So to kind of preface this, I've helped over 700 people land their very first jobs in tech. not exclusive to mobile development, although I've placed a lot of mobile developers. And I think what I've kind of learned, whether it's you're working on front end, back end, mobile development, cross platform solutions, or even cloud development, the general ideas are the same. Concepts speak volumes. And if you understand your concepts, you can actually utilize that in a way that can open doors, put yourself in a conversation where you can actually speak proficient about something. Because, and one thing that I always say quite often is having several projects made, not a to-do list or something, but a project that you relate to, that is going to lead you to way more opportunities than anything else, because you can articulate why that problem was there. You can talk about how you solved that problem, why your approach was that way. And talking about that in an interview is going to showcase passion, interest, et cetera, but it's also going to be something that you can talk about very, very well and control the narrative of how that interview even goes to showcase your technical abilities. Because in the examples of Android development, for example, let's say you're very proficient with Kotlin, but Jetpack Compose is something completely new, Hilt is completely new. And so you're in this interview and they say, what have you built? You just give some generic answer. They now go down their list of cookie cutter questions that I already have prepared. Like, hey, do you know Jetpack Compose? No, I don't know that as of yet. I'm working on this. Okay. Do you know Hilt? No, I don't know that as of yet. I haven't got that. Do you know coroutines? No. There's only so many times you can say that before this candidate isn't checking off the marks. So if you can at least articulate and talk intelligently about what it is that you're utilizing and doing, you're going to control that interview. You're going to find yourself way more opportunities than that. And honestly, even throwing it out there, LinkedIn. If you don't have a strong LinkedIn profile, you're not getting noticed and you're losing opportunities. You can utilize LinkedIn in a way to say, I've made this Android application. It's in the App Store if you want to download it, but this is the problem that I solved. Here's the link to the code. That's going to get people engaging with you and seeing your technical ability, because technical ability is going to open a lot of doors, right? There's a lot of soft skills that can help you, but really being able to talk about and articulate what it is that you're bringing to the table technically is also going to be very fun as well. I will say, though, some of the questions that you get asked in the technical interview, it's insanity. Some of them, you'll never, ever utilize this in the field, but it's part of it, unfortunately. And knowing data structure and the algorithm is definitely something that you need to be familiar with in the grand scheme of things. You want to add to that, Mohit?
Yeah, that's a great point, Danny. Just to add on to what you're saying, so what you're describing is part of there's as in an Android interview, you have a technical screen where you're asked. This is the common pattern followed, where you're asked in the technical screen an algorithm type of question, but it might also be an Android question. Also, that's also possible. And as you go into the on-site, there is another part of the interview called system design, where you're not coding, but you're describing. You have to articulate how will you set up a system, and what your Danny is saying. That's very really helpful in that part of the interview process. Now, there are multiple ways that you could go about conducting a system design. Someone could ask you, describe to me what you have worked on, and you want to describe what problem, how did you go about solving the problem, how did you go about architecting it, and you might be using Google Drawing or another way to diagram in this remote world, and if it's in person, it might be on the whiteboard. And the other route is that someone could ask you a predefined question, and suppose you want to build some application, and that should maybe display notifications. How would you go about building that? That's something to practice, thinking about those problems and being able to articulate. You might be in that type of interview, you might be given architect something where you're consuming multiple APIs. And what the interview might be looking for is a way to, how will you optimize something? Thinking about how you optimize something as you build an application. In that case, you may not need certain endpoints, how could you optimize it? So I think that's to add on to that, and that system design is where that question is so, where that skill is so important. And besides system design, one thing I'll share is that Another thing that you should know that, I mean, I've interviewed many people, is that you may be asked on the spot where you share your Android Studio screen to build an application, and you only have 45 minutes. Now, that's something you have to practice beforehand. A lot of people, they make the mistake of trying to over-architect it. If you do that, you try to over-architect it, you won't complete it in 45 minutes. The other person who was on the other side interviewing you will set, there's an expectation set that you could get something working. You want to be fast. You want to get it within that time, but also articulate that if I had more time, I might take this other better approach. And that's something I have experienced from interviewing others and doing it myself. And the other part is that, the last part I'll say is that some interview processes you'll be asked to build an app, and it becomes very challenging if multiple companies ask you to build an app. That's like Saturday you build one app, Sunday you build another one for another company. That's hard, but the great thing about those is that you have time to put into thinking about how will you build it. And you want, when you're doing a take home, someone asks you to build an app, you want to highlight your strengths. Is your strengths like animations, and add more effort into that? Is it architecture? Add more effort into that. Every take home you give, you'll be required to add a README in which you should write, what are my strengths, and describe how I showed that into the app. And it might be testing, did you use a pattern? Well, how did you go about testing it? I always add test to any take home. Basically, that shows that you're a good engineer. That's a good engineering practice. Writing tests is so important. So those are my tips on those things.
Love that. And I want to give Madonna a chance. Madonna, the question that I asked is, what are some skills or tips that you have to help somebody land their first job in tech as an Android developer? Anything that you'd add?
Yeah, I mean, Wade, I feel like you touched on all amazing points. And one thing that I wanted to add that I feel like that maybe has not been addressed is that one thing that I noticed is that if you already have another job going on, it might be tough for you to get that time to create an entire project. And one thing that I've learned is that if you get that kind of situation, try to ask the company you're trying to get hired, like, hey, I already have this project. For instance, I have my application budgeting buddy. Try to ask them, hey, I have this project that I've done already. Can I share that with you? And then we can walk through, or maybe create a new additional feature. I find that helps because, I mean, we all know it's not very easy these days with COVID and everything. And also, if you're a parent like me, you have kids, you have to take care of your kids. So that's another way that you can try to see if you can leverage your own advantages of your previous project or your playground. The other thing that I've learned also is that when you strengthen, Mohit said this, when you strengthen your data structure and algorithms, I feel like that becomes even more easier, because you can just say, instead of building a project, because I've had this from when I was interviewing before, like, do you want to take away project, or do you want to do live programming, which is more of like an algorithm or a real life situation? So if you can, and I might be biased, but I feel like if you're able to solve algorithm very well, pick that option. I find it to be much easier and more engaging, because it's like you're solving problems, which is what you'll be doing once you're hired as an Android engineer or any software engineer. So yeah, one, if you have a project that you've done before, try to see if you can reach out to your recruiter or the hiring manager and ask them if you can use that. And second, it's good to know like the most used APIs in Android. It's good to know, like, I don't know if they ask these questions this day, like what is an activity, what are fragments? I know they used to ask them before, but I'm not sure they do anymore. But it's always good to just know about that stuff, like what is an activity, what is a fragment, what is a life cycle of, the life cycle, Android app life cycle, and like how do you handle that? And also, Mohit mentioned that you might be asked to actually build an app within 45 minutes. I find that to be intense. I saw that comment too. I find that to be very intense. I don't know. I think I would panic if I was to do that, because there's so many things, like, You can't even, I mean, sometimes Android doesn't want to build. It takes like 10 minutes to build. So pretty intense there. But right now, if I was to go for another interview, this is just me, I would pick algorithms as compared to projects, because I would just like to do that kind of play around.
Just to add on to what you're saying, that's a really great point Madonna brought up. Interviewing. So another, like, interviewing, it's also not just from their side. You're also interviewing the other person, whether you want to work there or not, and you want to get as much info as possible. Like, every individual, we all have our different motivations and wants and needs, and you want to figure out, are you going to fit into that company? And it's not easy to do. I still struggle with that, but I think it's good. One thing I recommend whenever you're looking for a job, have a journal, and to where you write down, like, who are the people that are, what is this company about? Who are the people that are interviewing? And it may look up, a lot of people, they share their, in the schedule, who you're going to interview, their LinkedIn profiles. And the one thing to look at is that, like, a lot of people, when they write those LinkedIn profile, they'll share that I worked here, but I did a rewrite of this app. I built this feature of this app. And really what I found useful from that is that it helps me to understand, gives me some data points into what is the health of, like, their code base, and what did they do to improve it, and who are they, and then what did they do to improve their code base. And another thing to point out is that asking questions, have a set of questions, and it might be about the code base. So, for example, you may not want to work on, you personally may not want to work on a code base that has a lot of technical debt. And obviously asking that question directly is not good. It doesn't look good, but having ways to peer into that, and, like, for example, like, one good question to ask is that what are the challenges in your app, and they might go and describe, like, navigation or something, and you may have experience into that, and your value, what value, so you as an employee, when you join, you're giving some value to it, and those are good data points to know, like, where could I, if I were to join this company, give some value into the company, into it. And most important thing, wherever the Android development is not just about sitting down and writing code. And although it might seem like that, but you're that's only like 10%, 20% of your job, and you're interacting with other people. And not, it's much easier to deal with and phones, because they execute instruction, but people are much more complex, and that's the beauty of it. And you have to know, in this journal, one thing to reflect upon after you interview is, do I want to work with this person? How was it collaborating with them when there's some problem? And so those are things that are so important to know and to think about, and there are so many questions you could ask to peer into culture, and describe me. For example, the toughest question you could ask: what could you improve upon about your team? A lot of people, when they answer that, they will like have a ums and ahs, but that will give you a good peer into what it's like to work there, and that's
Love those tips.
It's important.
Love those tips a lot. And I think one thing that we've kind of highlighted is, and this will be the last question if we can just do this one kind of quickly, but I really like the idea that number one, you can get a lot of resources from social media. Look at this great question that was asked, a handsome avatar right there too. Social media is a great way to follow some of your favorite developers. Who are some of your favorite developers to follow? Why is it Danny Thompson? But also, like, what are like some areas that you keep up to date with what's happening? I know for me, I keep up to date with all the technologies that I'm interested in by following certain people on Twitter and Instagram to kind of get those tips. But who are some suggestions that you have to be on the lookout? And do you share anything on social media that people can follow you for?
Yeah, I can go first.
Sure.
So As an Android engineer, I kind of like have spaces that I do every Friday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern time. And Danny, I followed your lead, and I found them to be pretty amazing because now I'm able to speak with other Android engineers who are amazing. Mohit was one of my guests too. He's super amazing. So I follow Mohit. He's amazing. I mean, he's written a ton of information on Android. Please follow him. I mean, I'm just gonna plug for him. Follow him, look at his work. His blog is amazing too. And also follow me for the space. And we also have I think it's a monthly Android hangout. So if you are in Android development, come hang out with us and meet other Android people. And the connection is everything. Because if Mohit has a job in his company, he can always recommend the people he knows. And if he knows Madonna, he can say, hey, I know this girl. How about a reference? So you never know. Connections are super amazing. So just
Completely
want to
agree.
plug that. Yeah.
And I will also agree when I was researching this, Mohit's blog is next level. So if
That's
he won't preach or toot his own horn, we'll toot it for him.
yeah.
Toot. Highly recommend checking that out. Anything you want to plug, Mohit?
Yeah, well, thank you, Madonna and Danny, and definitely follow Madonna. She gives a lot of presentations, and there are so many people that So I follow a lot of people that I never met, and but the great thing about Android community is that it's open, it's very welcoming, and a lot of people. There are so many people I could name. There is a person. There are so many people I follow on not just on Twitter but also on GitHub because they in the Android community, everyone has contributes content in different ways. Some people build libraries. So, for example, I follow someone from Square. His name is Sakate, and he writes. He has a really nice. He has a library called Press. He's really good at he has some multi-platform libraries and reading their code, understanding like how do they go about building it. And there is obviously Jake Wharton, and he built so many different tools, and not just in Android but also in Rust. And in this community, everyone will have opinions, and being a great developer, I think is also a great person is listen to people's opinions. And people write opinions on so many things, testing, DI, and on Twitter, and just reading. And before you make your own opinion, just look at everyone, look at all what having an opinion is very important. It means that you looked at this something, and then you have some insights, and so that's really important. And there's another person who has helped me, that a lot of people have helped me. I've been active in the New York community, like Sam Edwards, who's a GDE, and he works at Dropbox. He helped me to put together that website, and he wrote recently a tool for Gradle to get notifications in Mac. That right there. How did he go about building that? That was interesting. There's so many of them. I mean, there's Mike from works at Dropbox, who built the store library, and he helped me. He's a really nice guy. Obviously, I mean, there's so many. When I would highly recommend. She, was very inspirational to me in giving presentations. And Christina Lee, I mean, these are people I never met, but I've been to their talks, and I remember the first talk I went to, and very inspirational to me. And she gave a lot of talks on Kotlin and was an advocate of it early on. And
Love these
I'll definitely
recommendations.
follow her and so many other people on GitHub,
Love.
and also on Twitter.
Love these recommendations, Mohit. I know we're almost at the end, but I really want to give Jay a chance. Jay, anything that you want to share, shout out, or maybe people that you follow online that you think are really influential and valuable?
Yeah, there aren't a ton of like specific people that I follow that are having Android related content, but definitely several resources I've used are Slack. There's several Slack communities around Android. I don't remember any of the names right now, Android United at least used to be one. If you just Google like Android Slack groups, I find a lot of value in also just like kind of talking directly to people who maybe don't have a ton of content, because I know some really bright people may not, tweet or stuff like that.
Love that.
Just to add on to that, it's called there's a Slack community for Android engineer, really big Android study group, and you could put in your I think you need a recommendation from someone. I could give you a recommendation if you want, or Madonna, I think she's in there too, she could give you. And yeah.
And one thing that I'll even throw out there, Discord channels. That there's an amazing Android Discord that even I'm a part of. There's quite a few actually, but there's several that are like next level with technical content and pair programming and all the good stuff. So highly, highly recommend checking that out. But with that being said, we are slightly over. So hopefully the powers that be don't get too upset with me. But if they do, I understand. I've had an amazing experience hanging out with all of you. Thank you so much for literally, taking this on such short notice, but also sharing such incredible technical knowledge and information. And the chat's been on fire. People have loved it and got a lot out of it. So thank you so much for being here. Until next time, everybody, we'll see you in the new year. If you haven't already, please sign up for Between the Brackets, and you'll be notified before we do any future episodes. So that way you can never miss another one again, whether it's in the subject of Android or web development or cross-platform technologies. We cover it all. We've done a lot of cloud technology as well. So it's not just exclusive to one technology. It's all the field of development. Highly recommend it so you don't miss another one. Until next time, we'll see y'all next time. Bye, everybody.